I didn't expect my grandfather to ask about the start-up at my birthday dinner. The night was supposed to be simple. One of those polished family gatherings where everything looked expensive and calm on the surface. My parents had chosen the restaurant, the kind with dim lighting and heavy wooden tables that made every conversation sound more important than it probably was. My grandfather sat across from me, the quiet center of the table as always. He had built his life carefully, investments, businesses, properties that seemed to grow while everyone else slept. People listened when he spoke, though he rarely raised his voice. For most of dinner, the conversation moved the way it always did. My aunt talked about a vacation. One cousin mentioned a promotion. My mother occasionally filled the silence with small comments about how busy I had been lately, though she never mentioned exactly with what. I answered politely when people asked about work. I kept it general. The start-up hadn't come up in months. Which was fine. I'd stopped talking about it. Almost a year earlier, I had told my grandfather about the idea during a quiet afternoon at his house. Nothing huge, just a small software service I thought might help local businesses manage inventory. He had listened longer than I expected, asking careful questions. At the end of the conversation, he said something simple. "If you want to try it, you should." A week later, he called to say he would send some seed money. Not life-changing, but enough to give the idea a real start. But the money never appeared. I waited at first. Then I assumed something had changed. Maybe the market shifted, maybe he reconsidered, maybe he forgot. I never asked. Pride has a strange way of convincing you that silence is safer than clarity. Eventually, the project faded. The domain name expired. My notes stayed buried in a folder on my laptop. Life moved on. Until halfway through my birthday dinner, when my grandfather wiped his hands with a napkin and looked at me across the table. "So," he said calmly, "how is the startup going?" For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. My parents both glanced at me at the same time. I felt the small pressure of their attention before I even answered. "Oh," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It never really got started." My grandfather tilted his head slightly. "Why not?" "I didn't end up getting the funding." The words felt strangely casual when I said them out loud, like I was describing something that had happened to someone else. He frowned gently. "I sent the money months ago." The table went quiet in a subtle way, no dramatic pause, just the kind where forks stop moving for a second. I felt a small confusion rise in my chest.
"You sent it?"
"Yes," he said. "Last spring." I instinctively shook my head. "I never received anything." My mother laughed lightly, a sound that felt a little too quick. "Oh, Dad, I'm sure there was just some confusion about that. Things got busy." My father nodded beside her. "Yeah, it probably just got mixed up somewhere." But my grandfather didn't look at them yet. He was still looking at me. "You never saw it?" "No." The word settled between us. Only then did he turn his head slowly toward my parents. "I transferred it to the account you gave me," he said calmly. My father shifted in his chair. "Right, well yes, but we were just holding on to it for a while." "Why?" my grandfather asked. My mother leaned forward slightly, her voice softer now. "We just thought it might be better to wait." The idea was a little risky, the explanation sounded practiced. Gentle. Responsible. Like something meant to sound reasonable if you didn't examine it too closely. Across the table, I felt a strange stillness settle inside me. Memories started rearranging themselves quietly. Every time I had mentioned the startup, my parents had discouraged it. Every time I talked about building the prototype, they reminded me about stability. Every time I asked whether my grandfather had changed his mind, they said something vague about timing. I had assumed they were protecting me from disappointment. My grandfather rested his hands on the table. "When exactly were you planning to tell them?" he asked. Neither of them answered immediately. My father finally cleared his throat. "We were just trying to help him avoid making a mistake." My grandfather didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he took out his phone. "I'd like to verify something." He called his financial office and placed the phone on speaker. The confirmation came quickly. The transfer date, the exact amount, the receiving account. Everything matched, except the person who had access to it. When the call ended, the silence at the table felt heavier than before. My parents looked smaller somehow, not humiliated, just exposed in a way none of us had planned for. My grandfather folded his napkin slowly. "That money was not sent for safekeeping," he said quietly. No one responded. He looked back at me. "You deserved the chance to try." The words weren't dramatic, but they landed with a weight I hadn't realized I needed. Then he turned to my parents again. "The funds will be returned to them this week." Not a request. Just a correction. Dinner continued after that, though it felt like a different room entirely. Conversations became shorter. The usual family rhythm never fully returned. When we finally stepped outside into the cool night air, my grandfather walked beside me for a moment before his driver pulled up. He didn't apologize. Instead, he said something simpler. "An idea should be allowed to fail honestly." I nodded. For months, I had quietly believed the failure had been mine, but driving home that night, I realized something had shifted. The money might come back. The startup might still fail, but the story I had been telling myself, about not being good enough to even try, was no longer true. And strangely, that felt like the real beginning.